Welcome to the program. I am your host, Andrew Wilkow. Let me say at the top, well, we will be getting to lots of Donald Trump's speech last night in my argument and when Danielle D'Souza Gill is with us. Nobody is rooting for Russia to win the Ukraine war. No one. No one, at least that I know. Maybe there's some nutcases out there. But asking for accountability for the billions of dollars that we are sending over there does not make us with Putin or rooting for Russia. And daring to ask the question, whose missile was it, is also not rooting for Russia. Just yesterday, we got early reports of a missile that was fired into Poland that killed 2 Polish citizens. That immediately got social media trending, Article 5, Article 5. And then Volodymyr Zelensky went on social media demanding that NATO act. Play it.
І сталося те, про що ми давно попереджали. Ми говорили про це. Терор не обмежується нашими державними кордонами. Вже поширюється на територію Молдови. А сьогодні російські ракети ударили по Польщі, по території нашої дружньої країни. Загинули люди. Прийміть, будь ласка, співчуття від усіх українських братів. Скільки разів Україна говорила про те, що нашою країною держава-терорист не обмежиться. Польща, держави Балтії – це питання часу, коли б російський терор пішов далі. Треба поставити на місце терориста.
My first guest is international law and national security expert Gerard Filitti. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, my question here is, there are reports that this was an errant surface-to-air missile fired by Ukraine. So my question for Volodymyr Zelensky and those that support him is, when did he know it was perhaps a Ukrainian missile, and when did he know it, and when was he going to tell us this? Because there he is saying that NATO has to act. I don't know about you, but I don't know anyone that's in any hurry to get into a war that may involve a nuclear power.
I think you're absolutely right. No one's in a hurry to get into this war, especially not NATO countries, not if we can avoid it. The issue of what he knew and when he knew it, there is a lot to be said for fog of war, but also more importantly, the Ukrainians are still using a lot of Soviet-era technology, Soviet-era missiles. What this was apparently was an S-300, which is an intermediate-range missile that shoots down aircraft or incoming ballistic missiles. The Russians have those. They have a lot more than the Ukrainians do. So because it's the same type, the same weapon system, it makes it difficult to say for sure who fired it. So there is something to be said for Zelensky not being able to have that immediate answer. But at this point, I think that with all the investigation that's been conducted, he does need to come clean and admit that this was an errant Ukrainian missile, as everyone knows it to be.
So if it is a Ukrainian missile, that's kind of between Poland and Ukraine, right? That's not, is that a NATO issue? I mean, I don't mean to be asking silly questions, but is that kind of a thing between Poland and Ukraine at that point?
Well, it's between Poland and Ukraine. Technically, it could be a NATO issue. Technically, if Poland feels threatened by Ukraine, they can convene the Security Council and address that threat. But that's not the practical reality of what it is, because Poland and NATO is supporting Ukraine. What this is a matter between Ukraine and Poland. Poland has expressed, President Duda has expressed that this was a tragic accident. They actually blame Russia for this, as well they should, because but for Russia's act of aggression, but for Russia invading Ukraine, this missile would never have been launched. Ultimately, it is Russia's fault, but there needs to be more transparency into these incidents. We can't have accidents like this without accountability.
Is the key word accident? Let's say it's a Russian missile that was fired by accident. Let's take it both ways. A Russian missile fired by accident, a Ukrainian missile fired by accident. Would either one of those accidents, if that's what it is, would that trigger an Article 5 response?
Well, before you get to Article 5, you have Article 4, which is what may have been triggered initially, or what they wanted to trigger, which is the NATO powers sit down and talk about what happened, investigate, and reach a decision before anyone invokes Article 5. So you have that process. That process played out to some extent. They figured out where the missile came from and that this is not something worth invoking Article 5 because there's no basis to do that. Ultimately, though, the issue is whether Ukraine is continuing to receive the support of Western Europe and the rest of the world, and it is. Whether it was fired accidentally or not, the bearing of that is whether we want to hold someone culpable to the point of declaring war or entering an armed conflict. And I think many people, in the case of an accident, don't want that to escalate.
Do you think there are neocons and interventionalists, I'm talking neocons on the Republican side, interventionalists on the Democrat side, that are just itching to get in?
I'm not sure that anyone's itching to get in, quite frankly, from what I've heard from neocons and neo-Dems, or whatever you want to call them. No one wants to own this war. I think there is reluctance on everyone's part to take a leading role or do anything more than provide funding or weapons. So I don't see it from that perspective. I do see more concern, however, in Europe, support for Ukraine wavering, because when there isn't accountability, people begin to have doubts. They begin to circulate rumors. They have conspiracy theorists just as we do. And the fact that this has always been the case, whenever the Russia issue comes up, people believe in conspiracy theories. So in Europe, more than the U.S., you have questions. Was it really Russia? Was it Russians impersonating Ukrainians? Was it Ukrainians pretending to be Russians? This opens the whole slew of losing popular support for Zelensky and for Ukraine. And this is something that the Ukrainian government needs to be mindful of, especially if it continues denying that it was a Ukrainian missile.
Look, I do not begrudge Volodymyr Zelensky. Okay, I don't envy him and I don't begrudge him. I don't blame him for seeking American help. He wants to defend his country. That's his job. He's the president. At the same time, because of Trump, Russia, and the accusations, our media has put him on a pedestal. And this is a rhetorical question. Doesn't our media owe it to us to give us the truth in this and not try to make this, an act of sympathy and, again, to start to beat the war drum? We need to know what happened here. We're talking about something that could spiral very quickly out of control. And, we're not using the word nuclear a lot. Trump said that last night, and he was right.
I think you're absolutely right. This is why I keep saying we need transparency. The world needs transparency, and the media needs to do its job, which is account for things properly and thoroughly. And when they first reported yesterday that this was a Russian missile, that turned out to be erroneous, but that spread alarm throughout the world. And the media needs, quite frankly, to do a better job in reporting things as they are instead of as they wish them to be.
Is the worst case scenario a Ukrainian false flag operation?
You know what? I wouldn't even contemplate that that's something that they would do. I think the worst case scenario is that in a war of this magnitude, tragic accidents happen, unfortunately, and how we deal with them counts for a lot. If Zelensky and the Ukrainian government want to have that moral high ground, they need to be prepared for properly addressing accidents when they occur.
Yes, but that goes to your transparency, right? I mean, that's the transparency thing, that we have backed Ukraine. We have sent them billions of dollars. I could argue about what was sent, previously during the Obama years versus the Trump years. And you're right, fog of war. Zelensky's in the middle of a war, as what they would call their commander-in-chief. But again, World War III, we don't want it if it could be avoided. Now, I blame all of this on Putin. Obviously, nobody thinks he's the good guy here, but for the billions of dollars and the demands made by Ukraine, they have to be more transparent. You're right. I got to leave it there, sir. Thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you for covering this important issue.
It is important. And again, our media was like that. Ready to go, Russia.